What's up, guys? Welcome back to Newswave. So we know this May Nintendo will have a big-time release with The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, but based on a new report, it appears they have another idea for a big project with The Legend of Zelda. This one, though, landing a bit outside of gaming. We'll go over that here today. Also, we are going to be talking about a mystery leak that just appeared online out of nowhere from Sony with a new IP that appears to be still a couple of years off, and we'll also be talking about the GameCube with a new accessory that is working to bring that experience to the Switch. Guys, if you enjoy these videos, make sure you hit that like button, helps out a ton, and if new here to the SpawnWave channel, make sure you're subscribed down below. And we're gonna start today with Star Fox from the Super Nintendo, but on the Sega Genesis. This is something I like to see with just overall ROM hacking and homebrew and even just straight up ports. This one showcasing Star Fox from the Super Nintendo that had to use that Super FX chip, but on the Sega Genesis. We can see this posted up over on Twitter. This is from 68K saying, new video of current status of Star Fox demo for Sega Genesis and Mega Drive. Now, we kind of see the opening here with the intro sound and describing the music and the sample streaming rate, all these different things, right? But the big part that I noticed is that the game appears to be running better on the Genesis than it did on the Super Nintendo that would tap that Super FX chip. And to my knowledge, this isn't using that SVP chip. This is just straight up using the Genesis itself, which is extremely impressive to see. And they also mentioned, oh, wow, people are reacting to this very strongly. I wonder how they're going to react when I release the ROM for this game. That's certainly something I'll check out, especially playing it on real hardware. I know you're seeing frame rates 20 FPS or below, but back then, playing something on the Super Nintendo that had that 3D effect to it, even at like 8, 9, or 10 frames, was a big deal. Certainly seeing this, though, on the Genesis will be pretty cool, so I'll make sure I check it out. Also, we did have some studio acquisition news over the weekend, which we can see posted up by VGC, saying NetEase has acquired Halo and Minecraft co-developer SkyBox Labs. And this is most likely why it made headlines everywhere and people were discussing this, because yeah, SkyBox has worked on Halo for a little while now, and they also worked with EA on different titles and even worked on Age of Empires. So the biggest thing, though, is they mostly work to co-develop larger games, and they have a couple of independent projects, but nothing massive. In this case, though, NetEase has made a lot of investments, we'll say. It's kind of NetEase, then you see Tencent. They're just making investments all over the place. Here, though, they just outright acquired the Canadian studio SkyBox Labs. So they didn't disclose the amount that they acquired them for or anything, and apparently they're going to continue to work independently, which means they will still hold up any of the deals or contracts they currently have with Microsoft, for example, and Halo. So I assume this will just enable them to take a shot at their own title once again, maybe one that they've had drawn up for a while, but just haven't had the backing or the budget set aside for it. So I'll be curious to see what SkyBox does now that they're part of NetEase. Oh, and we may have had a bit of an early announcement for a game heading to Game Pass, and this apparently came from the Xbox Game Pass application. What it'll do is send push notifications when a game becomes live on the service. Obviously, just kind of nudge you saying, hey, why don't you check this game out? You just have to hit download. Well, we can see this posted up over on Reddit when someone noticed that they got a push notification saying scavenge a post-crash future in Stranded Deep, or take on the smart mouth action of Shadow Warrior 3 now, which Stranded Deep did just kind of drop on the Game Pass with no prior indications. So Shadow Warrior 3 kind of going along for the ride there with that message, of course, has people wondering if that will show up on Game Pass at some point. It was part of PlayStation Now, which was surprising when that dropped, and I do wonder if there is like a timed exclusivity subscription deal in place and they're just kind of waiting for it to run out, because I won't be shocked. I won't be shocked when it does come to Game Pass. I do expect that to happen because we've already seen it go to another subscription service, and we know Microsoft likes to drop bags and money all over the place to try to get games onto the service. So yeah, at this point, I'd expect it to release, but I guess we'll see probably in the coming weeks. And guys, with some of the quick news out of the way, let's get into the bigger stuff. Let's start right away with The Legend of Zelda, but not necessarily Tears of the Kingdom. another project that's currently being rumored, and it has to do with The Legend of Zelda on the big screen, similar to what we're seeing now with the Super Mario movie, which, by the way, huge expectations around this movie, potentially being the highest grossing video game adaptation, and I won't be shocked when that happens. I think it's gonna top $1 billion at the box office when it's all said and done. And what we're hearing now is we could see The Legend of Zelda kind of move over into that medium. And the thing with this though is the source. I looked into it a bit more, and while a lot of people were talking about this and sending me the article and the report, source a little sketchy, but like we can see over on Go Nintendo, they did have this report. It's from Giant Freaking Robot as the original source, and they have been, we'll say, hot and cold with some of their reporting. I noticed that many threads were closed down when they realized they were the source and all this. So I'm going to tell you now, take this entire report with a grain of salt, but it does make a lot of sense that they would go, okay, we have the Mario movie. Donkey Kong is in the Mario movie. So while that may have been my next thought of, oh, let's go with DK, it's already up there on the big screen. What's another property we have that would probably lend itself well to something like a full-length movie? Yeah, The Legend of Zelda. And based on the report here, it's an animated movie still from Illumination. Again, makes sense based on the partnership that they have here with the Mario movie, and the Mario movie looks really good so far with the different previews. And even with the questionable source, we'll say, all of this does kind of add up to making sense that they would think, okay, what else do we have that we can adapt into some sort of movie or series? And that's the next step, I think, for Nintendo. While we're talking about different movies, eventually, I think it makes a lot of sense to drop it onto Netflix or Amazon or others with an original series that you create, even around maybe a smaller property that they have, not necessarily the Marios or the Zeldas. Maybe you look towards a F-Zero or even Metroid, and after we saw what happened with Cyberpunk Edge Runners, yeah, you could have a massive influx of interest just after somebody sees maybe the latest animated series based on Metroid or F-Zero or even Kid Icarus, Splatoon. I mean, the list really goes on and on for all these different properties that Nintendo can tap. But the big question, we'll just assume this is a thing and we're going to see The Legend of Zelda revealed for the big screen. Does Link talk? And is Chris Pratt going to voice Link? I would be curious to see who Miyamoto would come up with for a voice actor for Link, if he indeed wants Link to say something in the movie. Just based on the games, typically you don't have Link say anything at all. So a lot of questions there, and hey, you know what? To me, having really a company like Illumination, who's very talented, clearly with what we're seeing with something like the Mario movie, I'd be all for it, just to see what they can come up with for The Legend of Zelda as an animated movie. Next up, let's talk about this mysterious leak that popped up online. It having to do with a game that is, I'll say, in very early development at Sony and PlayStation Studios. Now, I can't necessarily show you the clip itself. It's not very long. It's less than, I think, 10 seconds, but it does show a very large creature climbing up kind of a structure, and you have a third-person view that does harken back to something like a Mass Effect, or maybe some people said Gears of War. Those are the two IPs and games I've heard thrown around, is it looks like a Mass Effect or a Gears of War, just from the point of view and obviously the tone that they're going with, it being sci-fi. Now, the leak in question comes from Icon Era Forum, and the person who posted this up said there will be more to come, as in, I guess they're just going to keep dropping clips in the thread that they have currently posted up. It's very easy to find. Once again, I'm not going to link to it, only because I know how this goes down with Sony going around and copyright striking and ripping down videos that have footage. But again, it's pretty easy to come across, we'll say, online, Twitter, or on the forums or any of that. Sci-fi RPG, as we can see, it is a third-person game. Unreal Engine 5, though, and if you just take a look at it, we have stand-in assets and different things very early on. Now, some of the details that have accompanied this clip say that it's Sony XDev, and XDev typically co-develops and will help to get games kind of to the finish line, but there's typically a studio that's paired with them, and once again, internet sleuths kind of looking around, figuring things out, and so far the leading candidate as to the studio that may be developing this is People Can Fly, so that's that would be an interesting one. People Can Fly developed Outriders, and I guess you can kind of see the similarities when you look at the footage here, but it is a new intellectual property that Sony would have developed, and it's definitely early on, as in this may not even come out. That's one of the biggest things here is when you see games in this state, there's no guarantee that it ever actually comes to fruition, which is one of the reasons that, one, they haven't really announced it yet, and two, they certainly haven't shown it. I do like the idea of Sony having their own spin on, say, a Mass Effect game with RPG elements and all of this. And again, a new intellectual property to bring to market it's always interesting just to see what kind of narrative and story and world they can build. But the other question is, would this be a live service title from Sony because they seem dead set on making a ton of those, or would this be a single-player narrative-driven experience? It is hard to say, because how would you, looking at Outriders, you would see that, I figure, as a live service game, and People Can Fly, I think they did a pretty good job with Outriders. It didn't necessarily catch on to the point where I feel like it has a ton of people still behind it, but when it first came out, people were pretty interested in it, and they just tripped up along the way where the inventories were being erased and other issues. But if they kind of restart with a new IP and have XDev kind of work alongside of them with Sony backing financially, they could probably come up with some really cool stuff. So I'm hoping this eventually is a thing, but I guess we'll see. It looked like it was still years off. But the one thing about Sony, and I will say this, they do like to tell us about studios working with them well in advance before we even hear about their games. So it's possible they could show up at some point in a state of play or on a PlayStation blog and they're like, hey, we're partnering with People Can Fly and we're making a new sci-fi IP. Next up, let's talk about a new pair of Joy-Con controllers for the Switch, certainly bringing the GameCube feel to the system, which we can see this posted up. It's a video on Twitter showcasing this new product from NetEase Gaming, and they have done third-party Joy-Cons in the past with like RGB lighting and different things, but as they went through the features, I said, wow, this looks pretty serious. For example, has Hall effect joysticks, which should make it so that they won't drift like we've seen with current Joy-Cons, and they appear to be full-size joysticks and all of this. It does have interchangeable gates around, so like the joystick rings that you would have, you can change those out if you want one that's just a full circle, or that 8-way gate to match the GameCube. You can clearly see the form factor mirroring that of the GameCube, but split up into two different Joy-Con-like controllers that when sitting on your Switch, one gives it a really good grip, but yes, does make it feel like the GameCube, which is pretty cool. USB-C charging ports on the bottom of each one. So if it's like their previous controllers, you can charge each one independently by just plugging in, or you just slide them onto your Joy-Con, or onto the Joy-Con rails on your Switch, and they'll charge normally there. They also mentioned tactile button triggers at the top, so those would be kind of like the clicky buttons that have very minimal travel. And for some reason, A, B, X, and Y light up, but sure, why not? They're illuminated in the dark just in case you forget where the big old green A button is. Now, release date and pricing are still up in the air currently, but we'll keep an eye on this and see what exactly it's going to cost to get these GameCube Joy-Con controllers. But I'm on board with this. I mean, one, it will give you a better grip overall, which is something that people can struggle with for the Switch if you have like larger hands or there's fatigue that sets in with that claw grip. Having something like the GameCube handles on either side of your Switch would be really cool. And overall, I just like the GameCube controller, so to be able to kind of attach Joy-Cons on either side that mimic that is great. And hey, if we ever get GameCube, I guess just GameCube games down the road someday, there you go. You'll have a couple of GameCube Joy-Cons set up for it. Not that I'm really expecting it at this point, but I guess you never know. But I'll certainly be checking these Joy-Con controllers out down the road when they do release, and we'll take them apart in a tech wave and even compare them in terms of the feel and the build quality and all this to the original GameCube controller and see just how close they got. And in our last bit of news, let's talk about one of Xbox's big releases for 2023. It was delayed out of 2022 into this year, but we are expecting it in the first half of this year. In fact, May is seemingly the month that's being thrown around right now, and that's Redfall. Well, There's been a lot of comparisons for Redfall, specifically though being drawn to Left 4 Dead, but some of the developers at Arcane decided to set the record straight and give their own comparison as to what we can expect from Redfall. We can see this posted up over on Games Radar, saying Redfall isn't Arcane's Left 4 Dead, it's the studio's spin on Far Cry, which I'll be honest, I read that and I said, okay, I'm definitely paying attention now, because one series that I do follow and I play through all of them, it is Far Cry, and I have my grievances with the series specifically. I think Far Cry could use a bit of a reboot and a shakeup. But it is fun to kind of go through them, and maybe I don't 100% the map, but going through that initial playthrough is a good time. And what they're trying to describe here is Redfall isn't going to be like, say, Left 4 Dead, where you're doing like almost rooms and then you go through maybe a certain instance that you have, and then you reset back to the menu, and then you set up another room with a couple people, and it's very confined. They're describing it more or less as open world to a degree. It's not some massive open world. In fact, you'll be spending most of your time just on foot, but it is structured around kind of the thought process of Far Cry and some Diablo thrown in. So you will still have a home base where you'll talk with different NPCs, get side missions, or you can just walk out of your home base and just go in a direction and see what kind of adventure you can come up with on your own. And yes, you can have plenty of people around you going on that adventure cooperatively. They have 4 different heroes that you can pick from, and the rest you can fill in with your friends. So I'm actually becoming more and more excited for Redfall. One, Arcane, it's been pretty good. I like a lot of their games. Obviously, things like Deathloop that just came out. I enjoyed Deathloop quite a bit, and we have had Dishonored, which was a big one, Prey. So for me, Arcane, when they talk about a game and they're working up to releasing it, I definitely pay attention. And the more I've been hearing and even seeing of Redfall, the more excited I'm getting for it. So the only problem is it is unfortunate. May appears to be when it's set up for release, just based on a lot of reports. So I was hoping that would be something in March, but just have to wait a bit longer, most likely. I guess we'll probably find out whenever Xbox is ready to have their event, and I'm kind of thinking that's going to take place right at the end of January to start setting up their 2023, but I guess we'll find out then. And before we go to the comment of the day, we're going to take a look at the poll that I posted up yesterday, where I ask, Redfall is set to release on Xbox this year. How do you feel about it from what we've seen so far? 16% said, I'm excited. 30% said, not sure, I'll wait for reviews. And then 53% said, I'm not interested. I guess the idea of it being on Game Pass does help, and the fact that if you have the service, you can just download it, try it out, and if it's not for you, you can delete it and kind of move on. It doesn't have that inherent risk of $70. As we know, Redfall, Starfield, and other titles for the Xbox Series going forward will be that $70 price point, or as Microsoft really wants you to do, subscribe to Game Pass. But again, it's Arcane. Redfall is becoming something I wasn't necessarily expecting, as I was on that Left 4 Dead, in that Left 4 Dead camp as to what I was thinking it would be. It being more like a very cooperative Far Cry with Diablo-like progression and loot. That might be something right up my alley. So again, I'm really paying attention to what Arcane has here for us. And we'll finish up with the comment of the day, as you're seeing here. This is from Craig, saying, I don't care for screens on my controller. Never cared for it with the Wii U and not interested now. I find it's too distracting having to look away from the TV or monitor to check something in my lap. It worked for the DS because they're right next to each other and you're able to quickly shift your focus between them. That is something that we would have to kind of retrain how we play games a bit, because when you're younger or you're first getting into games, you do look at the controller quite a bit. Just like, okay, where's this button? Okay, yeah. But as you go along, you just remember where everything is just by feel. And then they're like, oh, here's a screen that you do have to look down at consistently for different elements of the game on your TV. And that would be kind of odd. And really, would they be able to tie it in to where it's not something you have to constantly look at, but when it's time to look at it, it plays some sort of meaningful role that isn't too distracting. So that, and then obviously the battery life. Can you imagine what a DualSense would be like in terms of its battery life if it had a big old screen there? might be an hour at best. And ladies and gentlemen, that's gonna do it here for Newswave. If you enjoyed this video, guys, hit that like button. If not, hit the dislike. Leave comments down below about everything we talked about here today. It was the Legend of Zelda animated movie. Do you think that's the direction that Nintendo will go in after the Super Mario movie releases? And then also, what about this mystery game that leaked online very early from Sony, a new sci-fi IP, and then Redfall? How have you been feeling about this game as we're getting closer to release, especially now that we're hearing about comparisons to Far Cry? Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.